like a lot of these facts are no longer. I mean, this is from April 7th. The early on in the tariffs, a lot has changed since then.
That was days ago. Ancient history.
Yes.
Right.
So I think we've spent the first half of this stream getting the narrative of what actually happened. That's
Right.
information that didn't exist at the time. So I think it's we're probably better off to say, well, where does the policy fit with
Hmm.
this set of toggles in mind?
Yeah.
Well, I think by far the best fit for this narrative is that there's an actual intention to use tariffs as a long-term revenue source for the United States, and
Mm.
that's much more the intention than reindustrializing the U.S. and much more the intention than negotiating "quote unquote" fair trade. And I will explain why I think this. Um, so
So
first
so
of all,
if that approach is right, if that understanding is right, then maybe it's not 10%, but they're not going to go back to zero, right? Because they're going to want to get money from the trade from all these different countries.
that's correct.
Yeah.
So my interpretation of the Trump announcement resetting everybody back to 10%
Hmm.
is that they think that something like 10%, whether it ends up being 10% or not, something like that
Yeah.
is a level at which they want to see tariffs applied universally to trade coming into the United States, and they want to do it as like you can think of it as a variation on a sales tax.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
unlike most countries, the United States has no national sales tax. They have this Byzantine network of state sales taxes. Um, One of the problems with that Byzantine network of state sales taxes is because they don't apply universally in the online selling world, they're very easily gamed.
Hmm.
Uh, and they're especially very easily gamed by foreign sellers who don't have very many employees in the United States and therefore don't create tax nexuses in states in which they sell products. Um, so tariffs is a way of getting at these people for sales taxes.
Right.
So I think that that the evidence of what we've seen unfold suggests that the dominant element of the tariffs in the mind of the administration, X of China, is an effort to raise revenue for the federal government using tariffs as a tool.
Okay. So am I jumping ahead too much to ask your some details on that theory?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So let's see. First, magnitude. I'm sorry. I want to make a comment first. Let's assume for a moment that is the direction they're headed, and that it brings in significant revenue. That's the part I wanted to ask you about. But let's assume that for the moment. One of the things you think about is when you look at the actions of the state, right, is the ratchet effect, right? My friend Bob Higgs talks about this, but you see it in a lot of contexts, and that is there's certain things the government does that are undone with great difficulty because they entrench a bureaucracy, or in this case, assuming it's significant, it becomes a stream of revenue, and the government's like, even if the mood shifts in a couple of years or a democratic administration gets in, well, what, they're going to not get that money anymore? That becomes
Yeah.
a pretty hard sell, simply because of just incentive structure of the state, right? So this could be a thing where a lot of things Trump did were undone by Biden and vice versa. They'd undo each other's executive orders. This could be one where I can imagine it sticking because they're going to want
Yeah.
the money, right? If
Yeah.
if this does end up being a flow of money, the next administration, whatever they want to use it for, they're going to want that money, right? So that brings me to the thing I don't have my head wrapped around, which is, does this constitute a revenue opportunity of any significance? What's the
Well,
volume of trade? What is 10% of all trade with the U.S.? Is that enough to fund our crazy, huge government?
yeah. So currently in 2024, the US imported $4.1 trillion worth of goods.
Okay.
So a 10% tariff applied, assuming that it doesn't affect the volume of trade, which of course it will,
Which it would. Yeah. Yeah.
but that makes 400 billion in revenue. 400 billion in revenue is like, I don't know, maybe 20, 25% of income taxes. So it would be one of the largest sources of revenue for the federal government, but it's not close to, say, closing there's a $2 trillion spending versus revenue gap. It's something like 6 trillion versus 8 trillion right now. So you're not talking about a source of revenue that is going to fix that problem.
Right.
And you're not talking about a source of revenue which is comparable in size to income taxes.
Right. And that's the point I wanted to get to. Glad you brought that up, because being that April 15th, which is tax day here in the U.S., when our income taxes need to be filed and paid if you owe any, is coming up in 5 days. Somebody on Twitter, maybe more than a few, somebody said, "Hey, I think Trump means this to replace the income tax. Let's all just not file to force his hand." I do not advise this, by the way. I just thought it was amusing that this is all going down right before April 15th. And some people were like, he's sending us a message, isn't he?
Well, so like static analysis, which is the high end of what this is going to be. Yeah. So 4 trillion times 10%, 400 billion.
Yeah.
We're not looking at like even funding the interest on the debt. we're not looking at, right. We're like less than half the defense budget. Like this is not gonna, not that 400 billion is something to sneeze at, but it's you're not eliminating income tax for $400 billion.
Right. But my analysis could apply. That is, it is non-trivial amount of money, enough that it might be difficult. You know, let's say Trump sticks to it, and maybe it's not 400 billion, but several hundred billion is coming in through this means. That's still going to be hard to turn down in a future administration. Say, yeah, we just don't want that income anymore, because we're devoted free traders or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
A little hard to picture that.
Yeah. So it would be a significant source of money, but I mean, the U.S. government's appetite for money is enormous.
Right.
So
that's
the thing.
Shall I go to your next tweet here?
Yeah, let's look at this as well.
Okay.
So this tweet summarizes a system, or tweet thread summarizes a system that we have reviewed on this channel a number of times, but I think it's just worth going over with the facts of the last week here in view.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine a normal bilateral relationship between two floating currencies. A trade deficit for one is a trade surplus for the other. The country with the trade surplus will tend to, over time, exchange the dollars of country B for their own dollars to spend in their domestic economy, driving the currency of country A down, and getting to a situation where you get both a balance of trade and a static FX ratio between the two. And the FX ratio will move lagging the balance of trade, and you'll get balancing over time. So that's the theory, right?
Right.
This breaks down a little bit if you look at like radically multilateral trade, but the trade relationship between the United States and many countries is so large that you can almost treat them as if they have a bilateral relationship with the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to bring this map up because China stands out there.
Yes. So this is the reason why that classical theory of floating currencies doesn't apply to the US dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of doing what you expect in classical floating exchange world, all of these countries have accumulated US dollars and sat on them, either in the form of US treasuries or just in the form of liquid US dollars or Federal Reserve deposits or God knows whatever else.
Right.
And so this accumulation of US dollars abroad causes the special property of the US dollar that when you run trade deficits, the US dollar doesn't go down the way other currencies go down.
Right.
There's all kinds of editorial interpretations of whether this is good, bad, or indifferent, but it has three very important effects. One is that it causes US labor to be less competitive internationally than it would otherwise be.
Yeah.
The other is that it causes US consumers to be able to purchase much more than they would otherwise be able to purchase.
Outside of the US, you mean?
Well, yeah. So imports to the US form a substantial portion of consumer goods.
Yeah.
Maybe like a very substantial portion.
Mm-hmm.
And so US consumers are able to purchase a great deal more than they otherwise would be able to purchase as a result of the artificial strength of the US dollar. And the third thing is that the US government is able to print money and take advantage and effectively tax all of these countries that you're seeing in front of you via inflating the dollars that they're holding.
Yep.
Right. So if you add up the $3 trillion in China and the $1.2 trillion in Japan and blah, 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 you'll find that for every 10% inflation that is produced in the US, they effectively extract $1 trillion worth of value out of all of these countries.
Wow.
Out of their FX reserves. So this is why the U.S. government has been able to run like a 25 or 30% budget deficit for like 15 years on end,
right?
And not have a problem. But it also creates this really strange pattern of wealth distribution inside the U.S. where anybody close to the money printer gets a huge advantage because of the Cantillon effect.
Yeah, yeah. And then did we look at that here? Anyway, the richest counties in the U.S., out of the top 10. Oh, I was just seeing the Mises Institute. That's it. Out of the top 10 richest counties in the U.S., 5 of them are like, right around Washington, D.C.,
Yes. So because the U.S. government is able to run deficits in a way that it otherwise wouldn't, there's a huge incentive to run inflation and there's this huge sectional benefit in the United States to anybody close to power of doing this.
Right.
So
sometimes called an inequality effect, which makes it just sound like, just generic rich people are getting richer. And no, it's politically connected people getting richer, right? Specifically.
Yes. And I want to highlight a very specific property of this. So one of the very specific properties of this system is that it incentivizes the richest and most powerful people in the United States to be disproportionately invested in the empire, right? Because the average American consumer benefits from the artificially high US dollar to some small degree. You can argue over how much it is, but it's compared to Peter Thiel or compared to, I don't know, Paul Pelosi or somebody like this, who's very close to the money printer. The incentive that the average American has to participate in the empire is much lower.
Yeah.
The closer you get to power, the stronger the incentive to keep the system going. So you should expect that people who are close to power are much, much more interested in keeping the US empire going than you are.
Right.
Even if you don't have any kind of ideological framework, just from a financial point of view, they have strong incentives that you might not. And those incentives to keep the empire going might be quite a bit stronger than their incentives to keep a strong domestic US market.
Right. Yep. Makes sense.
So as you kind of do Kremlinology of people close to power in Washington, this is a very important point to make. when they make seemingly insane decisions designed to prop up the empire, understand that their incentive structure is not the same as your incentive structure.